All right, welcome to this week's podcast. We have a really unique guest this week in Patrick Ward from the Seattle Seahawks. Thanks, Patrick, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And we're excited to talk because this is like a new area where we haven't really had a lot of exploration in the sports monitoring. You're the director of sports science, is that correct?
No, sports science analyst is the role. So I handle analytics across. I do analytics across a lot of different departments, but in season, which is probably what you want to talk about, most of my time is dedicated towards analytics of what the players do on the field at practice, physiological data, training load data, things like that. Yeah.
So, for my benefit and for everybody else that's listening, and Jeb, what led you to this? What's your background?
My background was in exercise science, physiology, probably similar to most people. I was always into weight training and stuff like that in high school, and then I just kind of fell into it. I started in New York City, just training people at a gym, kind of like your run-of-the-mill type of thing. The 60-hour, 70-hour a week grind of training people 7 days a week. And then I moved to Phoenix with my wife, at the time my girlfriend. And my goal in Phoenix was she wanted to leave New York City because we were tired of paying rent. So we actually just randomly picked a place to move to. It was kind of like a spur of the moment thing. She said, we need to go somewhere warm because she was from Miami. But I don't want to go anywhere where there's hurricanes, and I don't want to go anywhere that's expensive. So we sort of just like said, well, what about Phoenix? And we had never been there. We flew out. We drove around. We rented a car, drove around, looked for an apartment, signed a lease. Once we found out it was like $700 a month to have, this massive 1-bedroom apartment in a complex with like 2 swimming pools and a gym. And then we flew back. We packed our stuff in our 300 square foot studio apartment that we were paying way too much for, and UPS'd it out to the UPS depot in Phoenix, got on a plane, flew out, and that was it. And while we were there, my goal, though, was that I was going to start a company, and I was only going to work with athletes, with my own population of interest. So that's where I started, like, my blog and all that stuff, Optimum Sports Performance Company. It was tough in the beginning. I scraped by barely for the first 2 or 3 years. Didn't have enough money for a facility. I rented space at physical therapy clinics and personal training studios. While I was there, I was really into track and field. That's where I also got into like massage therapy, hands-on therapy. So I obtained my license in that. And then after 3 years, I had enough money saved up where I got a facility. And so I worked with lots of, professional golfers, endurance athletes, soccer players, did some stuff with the minor league hockey team out there. So just kind of a variety of different sports. It was pretty good. And then in the process of that, eventually got a phone call from Keith D'Amelio, who's a good friend of mine who's at Nike. And he said, do you want to come and work with us? So we went up there and did some kind of physiology research around high performance. So we were in charge of kind of looking at high performance athletes, and we did research around women's soccer, the Professional Women's Soccer League, around a number of the track athletes that were just in the Olympics. We did projects around them, as well as handled all the off-season training for the NFL, off-season NFL athletes and some of the NBA athletes who lived in town and stayed and trained with us throughout that period. And then from there, we were doing a project actually for the Seahawks, and so I had kind of a jumps test battery, and so we would go up, we tested all the players, and then I did a bunch of analysis, and I presented it to their director of player health, Sam, who is my boss now, and he said, well, this is really cool. Would you like to do this all the time? And so I was like, oh, well, that sounds kind of interesting. So that's kind of what brought me there, and I'm going into my 3rd season now.
Okay.
Or I'm in my 3rd season.
And so what's the job? Like what's your day like?
Yeah. So like I said, I do lots of different analytics, but for the sports science, I guess, if we had to use a phrase, the sports science type of thing, or the training monitoring type of thing. The in terms of what I do, I would say I could probably break it down into kind of 4 buckets. The first being conducting scientific investigations of athlete-generated data. So whether that's data that we collect in the mornings, like wellness data about how the players feel and what that looks like over time, or whether that's training load data, either through RPEs or microsensor technologies, accelerometers and GPS and gyroscope and things like that during the training sessions. I handle all the analytics around that. So how are we going to collect the data? How do we analyze it, et cetera? What are the statistical methods that we're going to use to look at that and make inference from it, and how we're going to report it? So from there, also setting up best practice methods of data collection. So how do we collect it so that it's not noisy and we can make sense of it going forward? And then contextualize and analyze the data for coaches or management, things like that. And then also the final one, which I think is probably really important, is appraising some of these technologies. So there's lots of technologies on the market, and people sort of get swept away with black boxes and things that they feel or get sold to them under the guise of this is going to fix all your problems and tell you everything you need to know. So a big part of what I do is perform in-house reliability studies on stuff like that, so we can understand what's the repeatability of this measure. Is it valid? Does it tell us what we think it should be telling us? Should we spend money on it? And then what's the signal to noise? Meaning, what is the typical variation that we might typically expect someone to see on this, if we were utilizing this technology? And then when is the change that we see actually real, actually meaningful in terms of something that might need an intervention around, so that you're not just running around saying, oh, the athlete's in the red today, and the athlete's in the red 5 days in a row. What do we do? You're trying to really draw some clean inferences from stuff. So those are kind of the 4 things that I do on a day-to-day basis.
So when we were talking in the summer, something that was interesting, you were talking about what's a practice like, especially in training camp.
Yeah.
So when you're doing that, what's a training camp day like?
Really hard.
It's a long day from what I remember.
Yeah, the days are incredibly long. I mean, in season the days are pretty long as well. There's 2, I guess we'll call them 2 practices during the day. One of them being a walkthrough type of practice, and then the other being the actual training practice that gets monitored and whatnot. In terms of what they look like, the unique thing about American football is that it's not really a homogenous group. Like, you have guys that are really big, and you have guys that are really small, and you have guys that do a whole lot of running, and then you have guys that stand up, take 2 steps, and they hit somebody. So in terms of what it looks like, one of the tasks that I have is trying to understand how do we evaluate positional groups, and how do we evaluate differences, and what's meaningful for one position group might not be meaningful for another position group. And that's really an interesting challenge to have. We have people come and visit from Premier League soccer and Australian football and rugby, and these are more homogenous type of sports where the players are all similar characteristics and do similar tasks. And so one of the things they always ask when they watch practice and they're standing next to me and I'm coding everything live is, dude, how are you making sense of what's going on right now? Like, you got 63 guys spread out in training camp. You got 90 guys spread out across the 2 fields doing all kinds of different things. Like, how do you make sense of this? And so that's the challenging task in terms of understanding what a practice looks like. Is there's going to be certain guys that are more locomotor dominant in terms of their movement, and there's going to be guys that are more collision based or impact dominant. And so figuring out what's important for those different position groups, and then knowing that also might be really unique just to our team and our style of play. And there's 31 other teams that might have very, very different practice styles and demands and things like that. So it is a bit interesting to try and make sense of.
So when you're watching practice, are you literally keeping an eye on every guy?
Yeah, so I'll watch the feed, and I have some metrics that I'm looking at, and I will send a text out to my boss or some of the other guys if there's if there's something weird that I see, like, hey, what's this guy doing, or whatever. But yeah, it is. I am looking at all of the players on the feed. I'm looking at them by position group, by who's doing what. I kind of know what's normal. I know what's normal for certain guys or certain position groups. So it's trying to just identify when someone is maybe outside of the norm. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing to be outside of the norm. That's how you get a training effect, right? Is to train hard. So, when things look weird or look different than normal, it's then the step of trying to answer the question, why does it look different? Can we explain it? And is that even a bad thing right now? So
Yeah. Now, if you would, what are the metrics that you are looking at? So, like, I know you guys have GPS, correct?
yeah,
Accelerometer, things like that. What are like when you're watching this live? What are the metrics?
yeah. So there's different systems on the market. Off the top of my head, there's probably 3 or 4 main providers, and they're all going to have different metrics in terms of how they're named, in terms of what they call them, but they're all kind of the same thing. From a GPS standpoint. So GPS basically just tells us about things like uh, distance and speeds and stuff like that. And obviously, it's going to be dependent on the satellite signal and how many satellites are able to triangulate that signal. And obviously, it's going to be useless when you go and practice indoors because you don't have a satellite signal. But if we're looking at GPS metrics, it's the typical stuff that anybody would look at. The number of accelerations and decelerations and distances covered, or distances covered in certain speed zones, things like that.
Yeah.
Which obviously can tell us some things about some positions and not some things about other positions, just because some of the guys don't run a whole lot. The other stuff that these systems calculate are kind of coming from inertial sensors. So things like magnetometer, which tells us about directional components, gyroscope, which gives us things like rotations, and then the accelerometer, which basically calculates the amount of activity performed on all 3 axes. So front and back, side to side, and up and down. So I utilize that stuff a lot. Like the accelerometer data, the stuff coming from the accelerometer, to be able to quantify the amount of force placed on an athlete. So accelerometers are calculating accelerations relative to those 3 axes, and those accelerations can be explained as g forces. Obviously, there's about 1 g of force being placed on us from gravity standing here on Earth, and so obviously then those forces increase as people jump, sprint, change direction, hit, collide with one another, etc., fall to the ground. So from that, the locomotor piece, the GPS stuff, and then the accelerometer piece is what gives us the actual forces data. So called different things in different systems. One system calls it body load, player load, training load, or training effect, I think is what a third system calls it. So they're all called different things, but they're all kind of doing the same thing, which is kind of telling us about the load or the forces placed on the body.
So now you mentioned the inertial stuff. Are you able to get a read on, like, is there an accumulative effect of the hits that a guy is putting on somebody or taking? Is there any way to measure that, or does it? I don't know if it's relevant.
Yeah. There are collision metrics built into some of these systems. I'm a bit skeptical of them just because of the collisions and impacts have been validated in things like rugby and AFL, and we tackle in a different way. One of the things for us that's a bit challenging is we're not allowed to wear this stuff per the rules in games. So, as you can imagine with $1 million athletes, practice isn't a lot of tackling to the ground.
Right.
So I think that's currently a big gap in our understanding is what competition looks like. If you think about any other sport, basketball, they have a way of tracking, the game demands. In individual sports, obviously, if you run a marathon, it's 26.2 miles. You know the distance. You know what competition looks like. For us, we're still a bit in the dark as far as what competition looks like. So it's often hard to backtrack and talk about what training should be in terms of like cumulative effect of hits and how many hits you need in order to obtain a certain training effect. It's hard to explain that if you don't know what competition looks like. In college, they're allowed to wear this stuff, so people have done some work in terms of impacts and across position groups. And there's been some work in D3 college looking at inflammatory markers and collisions. And so what they find is training camp is really brutal, and everybody has massive rise in inflammatory markers. And then by about the third week, they just develop like this contact adaptation where their body is basically adapted to the blunt force trauma. And so it kind of stabilizes and stays the same. So how much hitting do you have to do in order to get to that? We really don't know, because that's not something that's been looked at yet. Okay.
So with that being the case, the whole, from what, how I understand what, like some of the things that you had told me,
Yep.
You're kind of taking that data. It's not like this. I think there's maybe a misunderstanding, and I might be misunderstanding it, but you're not just taking the data and saying, okay, here's the answer. You actually are writing formula or using a formula of your own to quantify and to kind of make sense of the data.
Yeah. So I'll build our own analysis, and what we can do with that is allows us to have discussions. It's never all data all the time. That's, I think, one of the things that people believe is like the data just tells you what to do as a coach. Right. And that's really a bad, it's a misnomer. It's kind of a bad way of approaching things. Data and the, we'll call it the art of coaching, the intuitive kind of gut feel of what you see, those things have to live together. And there's a statistician in the UK, James Stone, who his quote is something like, all decisions should be based on evidence, but the best decisions should also be based on previous experience. Yeah. And so the idea is, combine what you know with what the evidence, what the collected information is telling you, and fit them together in order to try and explain what's going on. Because team sport is such a complex environment as it is. It's not a direct relationship, as it is with a single sport athlete or an individual sport athlete. If you think about all of this stuff, monitoring, training, etc., those are all those come out of is individual Olympic sport athletes. All of the research previously had come out of that. So it's like track athletes or running athletes, endurance athletes, etc. And basically, it's a way for them to objectify training, because you understand that an objective way of looking at training leads to some sort of improvement or non-improvement in how you compete. There's a direct relationship between, and if you read Bondarchuk's books, right, if there's a direct relationship between like how strong you need to get versus we back off, which then leads to how much you actually throw or improve, right? And he has his three kind of typographies of the athletes that he utilizes to try and describe that. And that's really what the great coaches were doing anyway, was describing training at a very succinct way. Whether they were endurance coaches, looking at rowers or running athletes or cyclists, they were always explaining things in terms of, what did we do? What was the power output? What was the heart rate given that relative power output? Is this athlete under some level of fatigue? If we remove that fatigue, what kind of improvement do we get? Those are very direct relationships. In team sport, it's not linear like that. A guy can be really, really strong, but he could be horrible at playing football. Right. Similarly, you can have a great training week and everything looks good and still get smashed in the game, because what the opposition does is so heavily dependent, is going to influence so heavily what you do instead, right? So it's not a direct relationship. So having the coach's eye, the intuitive feel is also really important. I always say they check their blind spots. There's going to be days when the intuitive art of coaching is the rear view, and the side view mirror is your data and your evidence. And then there's other days where it's going to flip, and the data and evidence might uncover something that we maybe weren't aware of because you're dealing with 63 guys or 90 guys in training camp, or maybe 120 to 150 guys for an NCAA team. The data might give you something, and then the coach's intuitive feel is the rear view mirror or the side view mirror for that, and they work together. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, that I think that's what kind of caught my ear when we talked about that it wasn't because I've been around like a really wide group of people in the course of what we do with the books and stuff and the conferences, and it seemed to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of people were using some of this monitoring equipment and letting the monitoring equipment dictate everything, or like this is the answer, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to allowing each one of those things to be a tool in a toolbox and saying, okay, here's what we're doing. What's that say? Keep going. What does it say? Kind of like looking over again and saying, okay, is this verifying what we believe, or is it running against what we think? And then, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of got to let some time pass to see what are consistent threads do you see between what you're seeing, with your eye, absolutely, and then what does the data say? And then are you kind of like what Bondarchuk did? Now, can you see a correlation?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Yeah, you definitely need time. I mean, like one of the things that he did, Bondarchuk, that is, was come up with those typographies of athletes, right? Those profiles, and that should really be, no different than using any of the technologies that you're describing that people might utilize as sort of, I think people buy it. It's sort of like this confirmation bias. If you paid $3,000 for it, you better darn well like it.
And it better be like magic, right?
Yeah, it better tell me everything I need to know, right? And
right.
So I think people probably need to take a little bit more of a step back. And there was a great article written in the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance. It's like a little editorial, and it's just like the title was very good, kind of a controversial title, like monitoring tools, pseudoscience or way to the future, or something like that. And the idea was just, look, we have all these tools available on the consumer market, and people are buying them and using them in faith that these tools are telling us something that should be meaningful.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the real answer is that we probably don't have the answers yet. Like there's so much to still learn and know and figure out. And I think one of the things is people get information, in two ways, right? They get it from their friends and they get it from the media.
Yeah.
Both very dangerous places to get information. And, so coaches and managers and strength coaches, they hear about stuff like, this team is using, technology X, Y, and Z. We need to buy technology. Why aren't we doing that, right?
Yeah.
And so what they do is they purchase the equipment thinking that it's going to tell them something meaningful, and they prioritize what that equipment's telling them rather than prioritizing a person who's able to look at that equipment and tell you what it means in your setting, if it's even valuable at all, right? That's the other thing, is sometimes those things are not good at collecting data in certain settings versus others. The data collection methods have to make sense. And then, you need to really look at those things. A lot of them are built on sort of thresholds from data sets that whoever made the equipment, kind of had available. But that might not mean anything in your context. My football players are different than a basketball player. And if we're using the same technology with the same thresholds, how can that possibly tell me anything that's useful? So really, it's about taking the data, the raw data, and actually building your own analysis so that you can make sense for your players on your team that year with those coaches, because next year you'll have new players and maybe new coaches, and the context changes and the analysis has to be iterated. And so that's a big part of what we do.
That's a huge point, because I think everything is contextual, team to team. And like you said, I noticed this once I started having more interaction with pro teams. There's a lot of monkey see, monkey do stuff, and ironically, like, everybody knows each other in pro sports. It's kind of a closed community or whatever. So everybody knows what the other guys, they all kind of, oh, so-and-so's doing that. And they start following each other to whatever.
Yeah.
You see things kind of go this course depending on what it is. But there's been a number of, if you want to call them fads, that have gone through pro sports, trying. And right now, I don't want to say it's a fad per se, but the monitoring stuff is like now kind of a hotter, kind of concept now. And you see a lot more teams doing it. And I would imagine within the next 2 years, maybe every team in all pro sports will probably have something in place, if not sooner, maybe.
Yeah, and who knows if that's good or bad? I think it's more about having the right people to, tell you what the stuff means, investigate the phenomenon, and maybe probably pump the brakes a little more and call BS on a lot of stuff. Like every pro team, we have 1,000,001 people who send emails every single day with their new technology, and they want to come in and show it to you and present to you. And so, every now and again we allow, okay, come in, let's see what you got. And I always try and ask them really hard questions because I want to see if they can answer those questions and give me confidence that they've really investigated this technology. Technologies get rushed to the market all the time. And then they get rushed to the market, people buy them, and then the way it is, the end user ends up finding all these errors and limitations, and so then the person just keeps sending updates after you're paying them basically to do their work.
You're talking so right here.
Exactly. So I ask them hard questions, and then the other thing is, you have to be comfortable enough to say I don't know. And so a lot of times, people present technology to me, and I'm like, you know what? This sounds great. I'm skeptical. It sounds like fantasy land to me, though. I'm not an expert on this type of technology, but let me call someone at the university who is, so that we can have a discussion about whether this is plausible or not, because I'm not entirely certain what you're talking about. So having the kind of comfort to say, you know what, I'm not really sure what this is. I'm pretty comfortable with the GPS and the accelerometer stuff, and I've read a lot of that literature. But there's other technologies out there where it's like, man, you could be telling me anything, and that's the problem, right? Is that they capitalize on big buzzwords and marketing words, and coach speak, and they capitalize on those things to sell a product rather than the end user saying, hold on, you're not going to get me here. I don't exactly know what this is. Let me call someone and make sure that I cover all my bases on this.
Right. And it was kind of like what you and I were talking about earlier. When I don't, being in my unique position, I can call the world's expert on a particular topic and get the answer right from the horse's mouth, which is a weird position to be in, especially for somebody who's not qualified to be in the position. But I got like this great litmus test or sounding board of BS. So I can't tell you how many decades it might have saved me of stupidity, right? Because I remember when I first got started, I'd call, hey, check this thing out. This is new. And whoever, Dr. Yessis or one of the others, like, that's not new, number one. Number two, it's BS. So relax. There's not that much new stuff going on, number one. And people don't realize this. In the United States, we don't study athletes. And this comes as a total shock to people. We don't study athletes. So if you get the technology from within the United States, in my opinion, there's some degrees of inherent shortcoming, or you know what I mean? Like they didn't study it on athletes here because we don't do it, or it's limited in its scope. You know what I mean? Like you might have done a little study, on some volunteers at the college, but the reality is higher level athletes, we don't study at all in the United States. There's no such thing.
Well, I mean, that's part of the limitation of the PhD programs here. PhD programs need funding. Funding doesn't go to elite athletes. It goes to medical research. It goes to exercise for diabetes research, and so that's part of I guess that's part of the limitations of trying to run a department, really, is that the the programs probably aren't set up in the best way to understand that stuff like they are in Australia or in the UK, where you can be staffed at a Premier League club or a rugby club or an AFL club or at the Australian Institute of Sport, and you're working on your PhD, which is an understanding of elite level, elite athlete physiology, elite athlete training, elite athlete injuries, recovery, etc. So it is a little bit different. It is a limitation, I think, here in terms of producing kind of a black hole gap in the literature. But yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, I think.
It is what it is, and not, I kind of ironically, that's kind of where my existence came from, was the gap in that literature, at least to whatever degree that we could provide, some of
You were born out of a black hole.
Dude, you know what I mean? That's what I keep telling everybody. You know what I mean? Here's the answer to your prayers, right?
Right.
Because that's kind of where that void is. What was at least us getting involved was because I'm publishing stuff that's 30, 35, 40 years old, and it's brand new to the United States.
Yeah.
There's lots of books like Transfer of Training. He wrote that in the 80s.
Yeah.
And it's still a new idea here.
I mean, it's like anything, right? You only know what you've been exposed to, or what you allow yourself to be exposed to. And so if you're closed off to things, you don't get exposed to them and you know nothing about them. And similarly, if your educational pathway, if you never deviate from that and only learn from the person who's your professor, you've only been exposed to that. And so I think, trying to expose yourself to as many different things as possible probably makes you a better practitioner and more knowledgeable anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other point that you touched upon, and I think this is important, and I tell this to people, younger guys that call me and ask for my, maybe ask for my opinion on something. I said, before you listen to somebody's lecture and get too excited, number one, go back and look at what their results have been. Then we can come back. But if you hear somebody who talks really, has a great spiel, highfalutin, and you can see this with guys that come to you with technology, but then you okay, well, how about where's the results? Because maybe you're talking over my head scientifically, but I can count, right? I can.
That's right.
And let's see, what have you done? So if they say, look, injury rates went down X%, okay, show me how. What's the context? All that, so you can take that number and examine that number. How did that happen? Under what circumstances and everything? You say, oh, okay, now I see something that makes sense to me. You guys reduced, non-contact injuries by this percent, and the context was very similar to mine. Circumstances were similar. Okay, maybe we're on to something. And then you got to ask the deeper questions. Okay, what was the mechanism then? Exactly. Was that the mechanism? Was it incidental, coincidental?
Just normal fluctuation.
Sometimes. Yeah, you can have some of those things. I think in the technology, and correct me if I'm wrong, but really the idea is, does it work?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and I think there's some circumstances in pro sports where it's not working or not being applied effectively, and nobody really is worried about that yet. Like, they're still chasing it, and they're not even like, you know what I mean?
Well, I think it might be that people just don't know. I think a lot of times, they don't know. They might not know what they're looking at. People buy a technology, or they might be looking. Again, it's what you expose yourself to. They might be looking at all the technology exposes them to, right? So, oh, cool. Here's my red, yellow, green stoplight, and the guy's in the green today, and he's in the red tomorrow, and he's in the yellow the next day. Well, why don't you try and pull the raw data from that and analyze it yourself, and you might find something different or unique. So if they haven't exposed themselves to that, Martin Boucher is a good, really great researcher in this realm of monitoring, and he works at. He's currently the sports science director, overseeing all that stuff at PSG, which is a big soccer club in France, one of the biggest clubs in European soccer. And his quote is something like, "Before we adopt the technology for everyday use, like, we should try and break it. We should try and turn it on its head, throw it against the wall, and try and look at it in every which way and break it, and try and disprove it before we adopt it. And I think that's actually true. People are maybe put too much faith in some of these things without first trying to understand them to a deeper level.
I think that's absolutely spot on. That he's exactly right, because the just because it's technology, we've gotten a bit enamored with something because it's technology. Just because
that's right.
You know what I mean? We've gotten to anything that's Silicon Valley kind of birth to whatever degree. It's always smarter. Not necessarily.
Right.
It's not necessarily always smarter. Sometimes it's BS because they know that you're not smart enough to know the difference, and it looks cool.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And because you can trick me easily with technology. You can ask Jeff. I can't even hardly work my freaking phone, leave alone anything else. And he knows this. You got to walk me through stuff, and or the kids, just relax, Jeff. And then so I get impressed like easy, like you go, I'm like, wow. And but then I always go back to my what I call my turd in the Cheerios question. What's the results? And it's amazing to me how many people find that question offensive. You know what I mean? But I think that's the question that's got to be asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
That's what we got it for. I mean, it was kind of the point. If the car doesn't drive, I don't care how cool it looks.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. At the end of the day, it comes down to, did you win or did you lose?
Yeah, because everybody's getting fired if you guys lose.
However you're gauging that. So, you're right. The results need to the results are the most, that's probably the most important thing at the end of the day is did you do what you set out to do?
Yeah. And that was the reason why they hired you, the reason why you brought in the tech. Now, everything at the end of the day was to get the job done so the team wins, because that was the whole objective to begin with. So, and that gets lost a little bit, in my opinion, when I watch some of these stuff. Like, it starts to get like lower down on the list, right? Or like kind of somewhat forgotten. I've seen situations where they get overly enamored with, we're doing this cool thing, but wait a minute, we're losing.
Yeah,
kind of want to get back to the knitting, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's like the Wizard of Oz sometimes. You hide behind the until Toto pulls the Toto pulls back the cloth. Like, you can hide behind a lot of that stuff and make it look like, oh, we've got all these cool bells and whistles, but at the end of the day, if the bells and whistles don't help you do what you set out to do, stop using them. I think that's the other thing too, is people have a hard time letting go. Like, they just they want to believe so bad, like, oh, this technology can be really helpful. We just need to keep trying it. It's like, man, to me, everything's on kind of a spectrum of like, you have full adoption, meaning we're going to use it, we understand it, we like it, it gives us good information, we know how to analyze it.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, you kind of have investigation. We think it might be useful, but we really don't know. We're checking it out. And then in the first part, you have exploratory, which is, this is something totally new. We're skeptical, but we're going to give it a shot for a little bit and see what happens. And if the technology is not to that third level, if it's not to the adoption level, you should feel comfortable dropping stuff. Like, I just say, like, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. Yeah. This is not value. It's not producing anything. It's not providing us what we thought it was going to provide. We need to move on and invest our time somewhere else, and I think that's a really important thing too.
Well, I wanted to get just a couple bullet point things that I think would be interesting for everybody. In the NFL, in your position, when you have non-contact injuries, which is kind of like, I think, one of the biggest, you correct me if I'm wrong, the responsibility there, that's what they really would like for you to do, is keep these non-contact injuries down to the minimum. That's because that had become a rash for a while there. There was times there where guys were dropping like flies in August, right? Could you give me like maybe a list of what are the number one, the highest, let me think of another.
You cut out there.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
gotcha. Yeah.
What would you say are the top reasons why guys get hurt in non-contact? In terms of, is it the abrupt changes? Is it the volume of work?
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest reasons?
Yeah. I think there's probably three reasons why. I would say the three big reasons are one is too much too soon. So guys show up and it's like you're shot out of a cannon. It's like all of a sudden the training load is the highest training load you've experienced in the past 3 months, and you're going to do it several days in a row, and you're going to hope people survive. I think chronic overexposure is another one. So chronically high loads for too long period of time. High loads are not the problem. The problem is too much, constantly doing it is what breaks you down. And then I think the third is the actual preparation of the athlete. So training performance driven. Guys, training camp in the NFL starts day one starts after a 6-week break. You do mandatory minicamp in the first or second week of June, and then they're off until August 1st. So and some of the guys go and train and do stuff, but it's like, who's training you? Are you doing the right things? To prepare? If you think about training load, like, are you preparing the tissues, the actual biomechanics of the movements, the tissues that are going to have to go through those movements, the joint ranges of motion, and then the fitness element. Are you developing the fitness level, the fitness capacity and competency that allow you to tolerate the training load that you're about to be exposed to at the start of training camp? I mean, this is not unique to the NFL. Of course, this is, I think in the scientific literature, it's called early season bias or something like. I believe it's called early season bias in some of the scientific literature, which is just this exact problem. It's not unique to the NFL. It's every sport is, coaches start training camp, and the idea is, here we go. Like, let's just go. And it's like, if the players aren't ready for it, well, then you get what you see on, and you're seeing it right now. NBA is the same way. It's like, you're already getting hamstring strains. I mean, things like that. I mean, hamstring strains in the NBA, it's like, the court is so small. They're not even running max. How do you get to max speed? Like, where is this coming from? It can only be coming from the fact that you've accumulated this massive amount of fatigue within your first 2.5 weeks of training because the loads were inappropriate, or the player wasn't ready to tolerate those loads. And so you get what you've always got, kind of thing. So I think those are, it's not it's an easy thing to define. It's an easy thing to quantify. Certainly we've done that. But it's hard to change. It's as much social sciences as it is sports science, and you're trying to change. It's behavior change is the hardest thing, to do. You could have, and then that goes, that's sport, that's anything health related, right? I mean, it says on the back of the damn box, smoking will cause cancer, but people still smoke. Behavior change is really, really hard, and so, trying to change a coach's opinion on what they've done, or if they get it in their ear that they need to do something, as Jeff experienced and described earlier before we got on the call, if the coach wants to do something and you don't want to do it, or you have information that, even if your information says like, ooh, maybe we should ease into this. It's really hard because this is how we've done it all the time. I've smoked a pack of cigarettes every day for the past 10 years. Like, what are you telling me I can't smoke? That's the kind of, it's very hard to change behavior. And so there's a lot of education that has to go into that, and a lot of patience as well. And it's not going to change overnight, but the more that we can collect data and very succinctly objectify the training process, the better we can ease people into behavior change. And right now, sports science in America is not at that point, either because we aren't collecting things in the right way, or we haven't collected enough things or told enough of those stories in a very objective manner. that might be one of the current states that we're in. And hopefully, as we go, it gets better and we can be more specific with that stuff. If you look at AFL, the high performance manager, the guy that oversees the medical and strength conditioning and sports science, he's the coach's right hand man. He's the one that sits and talks with him about how do the guys look today? How does training look over the past week or the past month? What do you think we should do? This is what I think we need to do in training to get ready for the opponent. How much of it can we do? But if we don't start to move out and describing training at a very deep level, we're never going to get there. We're always going to be in this chasing technology type of kind of standstill that we're in right now.
Yeah, and that is what is I believe has been one of the things is the problem with the coaching and the people in your field, my field, it's a cultural issue as a coach, because a coach kind of sees himself as more than just like an objective tactician. He's a leader of people. There's this military component that kind of into it. It's a psychologist, all these different things, and the lack of objectivity when it comes to, it's like, I get it, like, the psychology, the social science part on the field, the game, but physiology, I don't know what you believe, physiology is what it is, and the biology is what it is. So you're not going to tell the body to do something that it's not going to do. It'll respond the way it responds. There's times where it's just going to give you the big FU no matter what you say. Well, we're going to push the body, and and the body's just like, well, no, we're not. Actually, I'm going to break down.
Yeah, I think there's definitely mental commitment to playing and being mentally tough and gritting out, and certainly on game day, guys have done things that are crazy with injured body parts just because the adrenaline takes them there. But at the end of the day, like when we're talking about particularly soft tissue injuries, like you can't talk yourself out of a hamstring strain. Like the biology either said that it's going to tear or not, and that's going to be dependent on how the training was leading up to that point.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to kind of wrap up with your thoughts on the lower level. So you're at the highest level for football.
Yeah.
When you get down to the lower levels, like high school sports, and this is prevalent there. It's just as prevalent at the high school level, maybe even more so than at the pro level, because you guys got, like, your coach realizes, look, there's these guys, we can't have this guy get hurt. And there's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot on the line. So you guys have kind of, at least you're looking at it going, look, we got to preserve what we have talent-wise. At the high school level, I think it's a little more blind in the sense, because they don't have somebody over top of them saying, hey, we can't have this guy getting hurt. Or, there's a little bit less of that pressure. If you're seeing high school kids get hurt, what percentage of it would you say is relevant to the workload they've been put under, not an externality, especially if it's non-contact, but it's been due to what they've been put through practice and whatnot?
Yeah. All of it probably. I don't know the exact number, but here's the thing. Here's where I'm at with that, because I've thought a lot about this over the past several years. If you look at other countries, if you look at AFL or NRL in Australia, if you look at Premier League, kids are developed through a club system, and within that club system, you're known. They evaluate you, they monitor your progress and your growth through that system. And then when you turn 18, you either become a pro or you go kick rocks, go do something else. Right. You're just not good enough. But the whole point is this developmental piece. And in our country, we don't have that. We don't have a club system that leads the kids up to the professional level. What we have is a coach who wants to win, and he wants to win now, and he doesn't have a developmental mindset. Yeah. So in high school, it's almost the worst, because you want great coaches at the lower levels, but what we have is, you got the history teacher, he's the head coach, and then you got the science teacher, he's the strength coach, and neither of them probably know what they're doing anyway.
Right.
And they just have the mentality of the kids, we need to win a state championship. It's not the mentality of, can I take this kid over the next 4 years and develop him really well and then hand him off to the college guy? And then the college guy says, gosh, over the next 4 years, we're going to develop these kids. And hopefully at the end of 4 years, they get drafted to the NFL and they play at the highest level. The idea is, high school coach says, we need to win state championship. I don't care what happens. Go. And then they get to college and the college coach says, we got to win the national championship. I don't care, And so the kids, a lot of times some of these kids get to the highest level. They're supposed to be at the prime of their career and make their most money and make the living that supports their family. And they're friggin' beaten and broken down because they haven't been developed in the proper way. And so at the high school level, I think it'd be nice if head coaches set their ego aside and made it more about developing kids and developing athletes than about winning a state championship. And they actually, got someone in who can do things like appropriate, strength and conditioning and has a objective of developing kids over 4 years and gives good feedback to them about practices versus having their friend who's the PE teacher who used to lift a little bit in high school and college. And so he probably knows some things. It's absolutely ludicrous that we allow our kids to go through those things. And I think it's even more insane that parents and athletic directors don't push for more change.
Yeah.
Athletic directors see this stuff and they think in their mind, like, how do you as an athletic director on good conscience say like, wow, these guys are doing a great job for our kids? Like, no, get someone who actually knows what they're doing. And you would think parents would push for this. Like, hey, I want my kid to have the best experience and be healthy and hopefully play at the next level and then play at the elite level, provided that they're technically and tactically they're good enough, right? And if they don't, then they get to at least know how to live life as a healthy human being and they've trained well, et cetera. But we don't, in this country, we don't have that. Everything in this country is about win now, don't care about anything else except, just get it through. And, what this kid is our star running back. We're going to ride him to state championship. And, gosh, if we end 4 years and we won 4 straight national or state championships in high school, and that kid is 19 years old with degenerative knees, I don't care because I won my 4 state championships.
I've said this a lot. I said I think the ego thing can actually be strong, maybe even stronger at the high school level.
Yeah, I mean, it really is sad. I think we're not doing a good enough job of developing developing the youth in this country from a physical standpoint.
Exactly right. I think the two things that I've seen is number one, there's a presumption that the lower level athlete can tolerate way more than they can. They might be able to survive it, but it's not helping. And what is needed to induce performance improvement is not that much. It just needs to be real succinct and precise, but the dose can be small. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't need to be a lot. It just needs to be precise. And like what you alluded to earlier, I've said this a lot. I've never presumed to go out there and write up plays for football. But by the same token, you're a history teacher. You don't know my field either. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And we both got jobs. You know, what I mean? You do yours, I'll do mine. And then there should be hopefully a degree of collaboration where you tell me what he needs to do. And I'll say, well, here's what I think, the volume and intensity that you can do that with, and this kid will still get better, as opposed to, you know what I mean, running him in the ground or whatever. Because you see this 5-hour practices in summer. That's insane. The kid's 14 years old.
Yeah, I mean, what is that? There was a show on, what is it, HBO or something, like the little Friday Night Tykes?
Yeah.
I've never seen something more insane. When I was in Phoenix, I was working with a junior high lacrosse team, and we're out on the field, doing our workouts, doing our runs, and push-ups and conditioning stuff. And I'm watching this guy coaching. These kids are like Pop Warner, 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old football players. And I remember they're doing the old the Oklahoma drill. Or kind of like the Oklahoma drill, right? They had like 2 offensive linemen, and the quarterback hands the ball off, and the little running back comes up, and then a linebacker to tackle him. And this coach is like, he's going off on the right guard, just like in his face, like, you need to cover the A gap. That's your responsibility. And I'm like, bro, he's 8 years old. He doesn't know what the A gap is. Just let him have fun playing the game. Like, you're so worthless. Like, I can't. And then the parents just sit there and they watch it. Like, I just can't wrap my head around how. Yeah, it's like, I mean, the parents are just as crazy. And Jeff, you have your own place, so you know what it's like. Like, I've worked in situations with some kids where it's like, oh my God, this parent, I had this one girl, and her father brings her in, and she's like 15, and he's like, yeah, she's a really good swimmer. We want to really get her into some strength and conditioning and prepare her for college. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so I start training this girl. I mean, you could tell by her demeanor and everything. Like, not only did she not want to be there training, like, she wasn't into swimming. Like, she wasn't into anything, which is fine. Whatever. If you're 14, you're 15. Like, yeah. So, I made it a point. My intern at the time, he was like, well, what are you going to do? And I was like, I think after the second session, I'm just telling the dad, like, it's not the right time for her. Right. So that was what I made up in my mind. And so they walk into the facility, and he tells her, just sit down right here. So he sits her down in the lobby, and he comes in the back, and I'm like, hey, and he's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, it's good. And he's like, hey, can I ask you a question? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, how's it going with her training? And I was like, well, she's 15. And I think, at this point right now, for some of the kids, they get really into it at a young age. Like, it just might not be the right thing for her. I think it's best if, she kind of just takes a break from training after the second session, takes a break from training, and, maybe even swimming, like, just let her kind of be a kid. And he goes, yeah, that's exactly what I felt. And then he walks out into the lobby, and he goes, get the hell in the car. And they leave. They still owe me to this day for 3 sessions. And so my intern's like, geez, that didn't go well. What are you going to do? And I was like, I think I'm never going to see that money again. But like, that's what you're dealing with. I had another guy who would bring his 13-year-old boy in and say, like, this kid, he needs to start doing strength training. He's really strong pitcher. I don't want him to get hurt. And I'm like, okay. And so I just start out doing some body weight stuff to test this kid. I mean, this kid could do maybe 5 good push-ups. And so this, father's going on about how strong I'm like, dude, he's not strong. Like, he has no strength whatsoever. He's a young boy. Yeah. And so I trained him for about 4 or 5 sessions. You could tell the kid didn't want to play baseball. Like, his dad was so into baseball. This kid wanted to play baseball on, like, the Xbox. He wanted to play video games. He was not into. So they come in after the 5th session, and his dad says, oh yeah, he pitched a little bit last night in practice, and his back is hurting him. And I said, oh, okay. So I go talk. This was when I was renting space at a physical therapy clinic. So we sit down with him and my buddy, who's the PT, who had worked in Major League Baseball. So we sit down, we say, so what happened? He's like, well, I was pitching last night, and I felt a pop in my back. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. And so I said, well, what were you doing? He's like, well, I'm supposed to pitch tomorrow in our first game. And I was like, okay, so you were pitching last night? You're going to pitch on 1 day's rest? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, how much pitching did you do? And he's like, well, I did 85 throws. I'm like, you realize in Major League, like, guys get pulled after like 100 throws, and they don't pitch for the next 5 days. Right. And he's like, yeah. And by the 5th inning, during the scrimmage, like, I felt something pop in my back as I was going through my windup. The kid ended up having a spondy, ended up having a fracture. And just because his father's an idiot. And he's just like, well, I just needed to get him ready for the first game. And I'm like, dude, you have no idea and you're the coach of the team. Like, this is the state that we're in. Like, he's coaching. Not only is he messing up his own kid, he has the potential to mess up 8 other kids on that team. Right. Like, that's terrible, Right.
Right. I think that this is I've said this for a long time. This is the only field where you can have absolutely no credentials, no experience, no expertise, and be given some kind of reverence as if you do.
It's amazing. It is very, it's an unfortunate thing.
Because you get opinions all over the place. Like, well, I'll get parents that have come to me and they want to tell me what they think I need to do. And I'm like, well, what'd you come to me for then?
Yeah.
If you got it figured out, why don't you do it? Yeah, that's right. You're the expert. Go ahead and knock yourself out. So
That's right.
I've gotten to where I started screening because I got calls from people and they're like, you've never seen a 4-year-old as dedicated as mine. And I'm like, what? What?
Yeah,
You're who? What?
exactly.
So I
Exactly.
started using a lady. She's Jean Drew. She's a graphologist, and she analyzed the handwriting of the kid, and she can kind of help me determine whether or not this is actually being motivated by the parents. And so I
Okay.
started screening people
Yeah, yeah.
and it's amazing what you find. Jeff knows he's used it a lot too. It's amazing what you find out, and I'll be like, I don't think I'm the right guy for you.
Yeah.
You're a little. I don't tell them, but like, you're a little crazy, and
Well, you know what?
this is for you, not for the kid.
But the sad thing, though, the sad thing about it is that you are the right guy for them. But
Probably because he's going to go get some other wing nut.
Yeah, the parent can't get out of their own way and get out of their own kid's way. So what they end up doing is finding the person without the credentials who is just going to do what they want. And that, so that's the problem, is that you are the right person for them, but they just don't know it. Yeah. That's the biggest issue. That's the problem.
Yeah, and it's a case like with the football team, the high school football teams or basketball teams, everything. They really do. They need somebody to say, look, you can tell this isn't working because number one, guys aren't getting better, and they're getting hurt. If you've got a herniated disc with a high school kid, it's your fault.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Because you know how hard it is for a high school kid to herniate a disc. You know what I mean?
It's insane.
It's a coach. In my opinion, it's coach's fault.
Yeah,
I don't see how it could. It's not if it's not related to some collision, and especially if it happens in the weight room. And a lot of the stuff actually that happens out on the field is a relationship back to what you were doing in the weight room. People think that injuries only happen in real time. They're cumulative.
No.
Cumulative.
Training needs to be performance based. So look, games are won on the field during the actual game,
right?
And after that, games are won in practice when you prepare for your opponent. And after that, games are won in the gym where you physically prepare to play the game. The only reason you have a medical staff is because something went wrong in one of those 3 areas, and it's probably all combined. They're interrelated, but that's
probably your fault too.
Yeah, it's the only reason why you have a medical staff is to take care of those guys where something went wrong in one of those 3 areas because the prescription was incorrect.
Absolutely,
what you prescribed was incorrect.
Absolutely, that you hit the nail on the head. Well, we went way over the time, but you are I thank you for being patient with us and let us take so much of your time. But
thank you.
Absolutely spot on. I mean, it's really great to hear, guys at the higher level that are looking at this from an objective point of view and really just looking at it from the perspective of what's best for the athlete.
That's right.
It's good because what's good for the athletes is what's good for the team in this stuff. Because if the athlete's healthy, he's he's resilient and durable to whatever degree he needs to be, then he's going to perform well. The team's going to be happy. Everybody's going to be happy. So right. I think that is absolutely on point, and I've learned a decent amount today too, because there's a lot of stuff I didn't know myself. So I appreciate all the knowledge. Oh, and by the way, we didn't shout out at the beginning, Jeff, but I do have.
Look at that! That's a nice shirt there. I can't believe it doesn't have any spaghetti stains on it or something. That is a very white shirt.
I just got it out of the laundry. I had actually I can tell you I had a white Arizona Cardinal shirt on earlier today. Not so much. It didn't make it.
Jelly donuts or what? What is it?
Dude, I was like it was like noon and it was already dirty. Buddy sent me an all white. I don't know what he's thinking. Send me an all white one. Buddy, send me a long sleeve shirt. He says, okay. So he sent me a gray one about 2 weeks ago for someone else. I said, send me one of those. I opened it up and it's all white. I'm like, oh my gosh. Knowing me, my wife's like, yeah, that ain't gonna make it very far. And true enough, it wasn't. I think it was like 12:30. We got home, dirty. But I had this backup. She had that in the laundry earlier, so I'm good to go.
Yeah. Awesome.
so anyway, yeah, the darker the better for me, because my wife is a magician because she's kept this white for a couple months now. That's pretty good.
Good.